All right, well, welcome back from the first breakout session. I've asked one of our facilitators and also a panelist on our upcoming panel here, Drew Camp, to share something that he learned in his session. So Drew, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. One of the things we talked a lot about where the business starts was one thing that Mike shared, and just how that information is so much more readily available, whether it's at the Secretary of State's website, whether it's through a community college, a college, whatever it may be. Those resources are so much more available. And plus, I think COVID kind of pushed people in that direction to doing their own things for that flexibility purpose. So we did talk a lot about that. And Diana from the partnership has some good perspective from the entrepreneurial startup perspective too. So that was something we really talked a lot about in our group.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. And we'll hear more from you here in just a bit. We've got a great mini panel discussion lined up for you featuring 4 fantastic panelists from across the state. I'm going to introduce them and then ask a few questions. So with us, we have Tej Dhawan, and he's the Strategic Initiatives and Officer at Principal Financial Group and co-founder of Plains Angels, a network of angel investors from Central Iowa. He was entrepreneur in residence at the Iowa Agritech Accelerator and a board member and interim executive director of the Global Insurance Accelerator. He is the chair of the board of trustees at Central College and currently serves on the boards of Ballet Des Moines and the American Heart Association of Central Iowa. Billi Hunt was named the executive director of America's Cultivation Corridor in February 2018. She brings 25 years of experience in agriculture and the Iowa business community to the corridor's efforts to enhance agricultural sustainability and accelerate business development by attracting new companies, talent, and capital to Central Iowa. Prior to joining America's Cultivation Corridor, Hunt served as government affairs manager for DuPont. And Drew Camp, who you just heard from, is president and CEO of the Council Bluffs Area Chamber of Commerce. Before that, he was with Ames Main Street and the Ames Chamber of Commerce. Drew has been involved with numerous professional development and community organizations throughout his career. And Candy Karsjens is the director of the North Iowa Area Community College, John Pappajohn Entrepreneurial Center in Mason City. She first joined the NIACC Pappajohn Entrepreneurial Center in 2019 as the director of innovation and acceleration. She has over 30 years of business and industry experience, including owning and selling several successful businesses. So as you can see, we have a great mix of experts. So I want to start out by asking each of you, what do you see as the top priorities for each of your areas or organizations when it comes to business opportunities? And Tej, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Emily. Slight background. I am a part of a 11-member group. One of my colleagues is on this call today, Hank Norum. The 11 of us represent various entities, and if we were to break us down, we would be entrepreneurial, risk capital, corporate, government, and education. And as a group of 11, we're looking at this pentagram of 5 entities that must work together over a super long period of time that actually extends beyond our investment, our work, maybe even our lives, to grow an ecosystem. And we are working with MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, to not only grow our area, the Des Moines or the Central Iowa area, but also compare ourselves to 3 other Midwestern cities: Kansas City, Omaha, and St. Louis, and then 4 countries: the states in Western Australia, in Brazil, the country of Hungary, and Dominican Republic, to see how ecosystems actually grow and grow beyond. So to come back to your question, what's most important for us is to not just look at our tiny little microcosm of what, 0.25% of the population that is focused on this type of business, but look at ourselves in the global perspective and say, what are our strengths? How do we grow our strengths? And then wherever our weaknesses exist, how do we shift those weaknesses to areas of strength? So we are learning, and we're going to try and publish. We've just started our work, and led by Diana Wright at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, the 10 of us, along with her, are working on it.
Awesome. Thank you. And Billy, we'll go to you next with the same question.
Okay, so top priorities I see is one, the speed of innovation and how we address that. And that can be done with the value of public-private partnerships. So if we look just at what is happening at the ISU Research Park and Ames, we have Deere Corporation, we have Sukup, we have Kent, all with strong footprints there in Ames. One, to be next to people who can help them with their innovation. There was just a great story done on John Deere and an English professor helping. John Deere and English professor, you want to naturally just put those together, but because they're side by side, you can do that. Sukup and Kent also have great stories of how being next to the university is helping them with speed of innovation, but they still go home to Muscatine, Sheffield, and that's where their headquarters are. I would say also identifying the right partnerships. I think that's important. And some roles you may go in as the leader, others you may go as the plus one. And knowing what your role is in that partnership, I think is key as well. But finding more connections for partnerships is something I think across the state we can put at a higher value. And then one I have just noticed is the consistency in the funnel of innovation. Innovation's hard. It takes years to get something to the marketplace. And sometimes we're so focused on just getting things through the chain. We need constantly across the state being put more innovation ideas into the funnel. And so those would be my three top priorities. Each of them are not necessarily unique, but ones that take focus to create a thriving ecosystem.
Awesome. And Drew, what would you say top priorities?
Just Billy hit a lot of really good points, and to build off of that, just public-private partnerships are hugely important. But as we work with, as a chamber and economic development organization, we work with our businesses and talk about some of their problems. Obviously, as Mike said, talent, number one. So we're seeing moves to automation, to innovation, lean manufacturing, manufacturing 4.0, Debbie and her team doing a great job with that. But also just with the community colleges being a conduit to them, there's so many times they might not know what the pain points are for those industries. So we can be that conduit and actually start to bring them into all those meetings, the BR&E, business retention expansion meetings that we're doing as part of Best of Iowa to really help that and foster that innovation. And then it goes back to that public-private partnership to just have it very much from the base when you're starting those conversations. But also one thing that's super important that Billy hit on is in those partnerships, know what your role is. Don't try to be something you're not. You can get yourself very much into trouble by doing that. So that's something that's really important. But just a few opportunities that I want to hit on specifically here in our community is the community school districts are doing some really exciting things. They are throughout the state, but we have a really good TradeWorks program here at Council Bluffs directly tied into the Iowa Western Community College. Lewis Central has a great CTE program as well, and some new facilities coming online for that too. Iowa Western does a great job pairing with them. One thing I want to touch on is because it's a huge challenge, workforce, childcare, housing, huge challenges. But with regards to childcare, our school district's actually stepping up and doing 0 to 3 childcare and doing universal pre-K. It's one of the first examples in the state and the region, and largely getting calls nationally even as to how they're doing it. I think school districts have a really good opportunity to fill in that where businesses and others may not be able to. And in our instance, that's definitely the case. The last thing that I want to touch on as an opportunity is we actually have obviously a great opportunity being that, sorry, Des Moines, we're the largest MSA in the state of Iowa. We just happen to have a lot of folks over in Nebraska. So really bridging the divide of, Omaha and Council Bluffs, and really making sure we're having those ongoing conversations. There's a huge project as part of the Urban Core project that you want to build in the next 20 years, 30,000 new jobs, 30,000 new residents. One of the ways we're going to do that, build a multimodal bridge and streetcar over the Missouri River, no small task, to connect with the Omaha streetcar, bring it over into Council Bluffs, ultimately, hopefully, to our 100 block and Main Street areas, to the hospitals. That's something that you have to have all the ducks in a row. That's, the chamber, it's the city, it's Iowa West Foundation, our gaming revenue stream, also some other fundraising apparatuses. Those are some really exciting opportunities. Those are the stories that we can tell that make people want to live in our community and be a part of it. So I think that's something that's really important as we look at overcoming, building off those opportunities and overcoming barriers.
Great, thank you. And Candy, what are you seeing as some of the top priorities up in the Mason City area?
Well, it's very similar to some of my colleagues here that you mentioned. Our top priority, probably not only in rural North Iowa, but in Iowa, is for us to expand and strengthen those collaborations and partnerships that we have not only across the state, but across the Midwest, which does one thing Billy mentioned, which is we need speed. We need more speed when it comes to innovations and early stage startups. And the way we get that speed is everybody in the pool and everybody contributing where they can help the best with whatever resources they have. And those partnerships for us in the rural area are really mission critical because we have to have access to some of those critical resources that early stage startups need, like access to tech talent, C-level experienced mentors, accelerator programming, and especially early stage capital, which, and I know Debbie's on here, but we are so fortunate that I have friends and business owners in other states, and whether it was during COVID or now, the state of Iowa provides so much more funding than many other states do for those early stage companies. We do have some access. We just need to speed it up and get to the bigger money faster because it's very costly to have that new innovation or even just to innovate to Industry 4.0 within your own company. Just the incremental and sustainable innovation can be very costly. So we need to have access to capital for both early stage and mature businesses too. So, and R&D talent. That's one place where we need our collaborative partnerships. We have one with Cirrus and with our partners at ISU and at University of Iowa and the Pappajohn centers there, having access to the research and development staff because we need them to get the federal grants and go bigger, faster.
Great. Well, I want to follow up. A lot of you mentioned collaboration, and Billy, maybe I'll start with you. But what are some tips for collaboration? What does that look like? Obviously, organizations have their own missions and their own work that they're doing. But to do more, it's oftentimes takes partnering with others. So I'm curious to hear your tips on that collaboration.
Well, one I think is probably the hardest is check your egos at the door. Be open to looking around and looking at things differently. I would say I would also be very clear in expectations and what you want from those partnerships. It's okay to say to someone, I don't think we're the right partner at this time for this reason. But do you know someone who could fill this void, this gap for me to help me identify that? I'm a big believer, interactions shouldn't be transactional, they should be relational because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So I just be clear with what you want and remember that every connection is of value, just maybe not today. That's kind of a short answer to that, but that's kind of how I like to look at things.
Anyone else want to weigh in on collaboration tips?
I think one of the lessons we learned as this group of 11 recently was we had this pentagram of 5 different entities, and yes, collaboration by itself is a very very positive thing to do, and all of us would love to schedule a meeting and then get around the same table and talk. But often we talk past each other because we are never willing to bring each other's strengths, but more importantly, expose our frustrations with the other entities. So as a part of our exercise, we first had to identify what are our frustrations. So in my case, as a risk capital person, what are my frustrations with government, universities, entrepreneurs, and corporates? And they had to do the same about us in reverse. And just exposing that list of frustrations opened up a way for us to converse. And even as our team was coming back from Boston after our last workshop, we were realizing that going in, we had been 11 people who knew each other. Coming back, we were 11 people who knew each other's priorities and how we needed to help the other. So I think it accelerated collaboration just to know the weaknesses and strengths and frustrations.
The only thing I'll add, because those were both really good points, is just that it comes down, as most things do, to trust and cultivating that trust within that group. The confidentiality piece is huge, especially in our business, knowing that if you say something, it's not going to be broadcast to the community. That's really, really important. And then just clear expectations and action items. I think we all hate when we have meetings and it's not clear, what did we even accomplish? What are we planning on doing to have an impact following that?
And to transition a little bit here to, what are some of the barriers that you all see to business opportunity in the state? And Candy, we can start with you.
Sure. I think probably for us located in a rural area, access to critical resources. If we have businesses and early stage startups that want to be able to compete on a global scale, we have to have greater access. And that takes collaborative partnerships. And so that is going forward this year. One of my specific goals, but I know everyone else's too, is to collaborate on what does that person need next. There is no prescriptive checklist for an early stage startup. It's determining what they need next, and like Billy said, getting them to that person. So the stronger we can build the relationships and collaborations and this kind of giant interconnected network of resources in Iowa, the better it is for everybody. So my goal is to continue building those so we can overcome some of those barriers.
Tej, what about for you from the startup perspective? What barriers do you see existing in the state?
I think there are two primary barriers. The first is there just aren't enough startups. We just need a larger population. And I'm differentiating startup from new businesses, because a new business is entrepreneurial. It can be a way to create a living, which is perfect. But startups, the growth stage startups, the innovation capital that are filing patents and so on, that subset out of those 33,000 companies is going to be few, but they have to be a meaningful number to create a critical mass. And we just don't have that. And part of the reason we don't have that is because our resources are spread very, very thinly. So Plains Angels, which is an angel investor group, came about not because there weren't people investing, but they were spread out. So unless a startup founder knew a whole bunch of people that the SEC calls accredited investors and could arrange appointments with them, they wouldn't be able to raise capital. So we just decided we would pull them all together into a room, meet monthly, and let the entrepreneurs have access to them in the same room without having to know them. So things like that, we need to collect closer in a place and then continually make them available over long periods of time, so these things take root and become a part of our business fabric. This way, the finder's fee organizations become irrelevant. So the connection becomes between the money and the startup founder. Those would be the two barriers, I would say. Thinly spread, and there's not enough.
Billy, what would you say?
So I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to this. And one, how we define innovation, how we define ideation, how we define these obstacles are probably different in Mason City, Des Moines. We'll go down to my hometown of Diagonal. It's different across the entire state. So one, having respect and understand that everyone looks at this through a different lens, I think is very important. And how we classify what is innovation. My board of investors would say that startups are critical. We need to have as many startups as possible, but don't forget the innovation that's coming out of a Corteva or out of a Hy-Vee or out of a Kent Corporation. Don't forget, they're continuing to innovate every day too. Our teachers continue to innovate. Our communities, we were just listening to Drew talk about, partnering with Omaha and Council Bluffs for access that hasn't been provided before. That's innovation at a community level. So I think it's important for us to realize that happens at all levels. The other barrier I kind of see, or we all see, we all hear, we probably all feel, is the just division in our population. And we tend to believe that my view is the right way, and everyone should believe how I believe, which is stopping us from coming to the table and having conversation. I am a strong believer that if we all just get together and start talking, we probably agree on 60%. It's those 20% on the fringes where we don't. But because we are so adamant that my view is the 75% right view, you may not go have that conversation. We're stalling collaboration. We're stalling innovation. We're stalling opportunities to connect people. And in our breakout group, a guy was calling it wokeness. I hate that term, but something's happened in our world where we're afraid to come together and just learn. Tosh said the MIT project, which I've heard from 3 people who are working on that, how fascinating that has been, just to kind of see where everyone's at, and then how do we come together to grow. We need to do that more consistently.
And Drew, what would you say about some of the barriers?
Yeah, so for me, I hinted at a few of them earlier, and really, you know, as I look at it as a chamber and economic development group, we're all seeing it. Mike talked about them earlier, but workforce, number one, hands down, it's a no-brainer. Housing right there alongside it, childcare, and then placemaking. We've seen some strategic investments in a very large scale with Destination Iowa, and we thank the administration and Debbie and her team for the great work that they've done on that Destination Iowa piece for placemaking. But I think there's some opportunities in all of those spaces to really provide some impactful change. But I think the biggest thing is there's strength in numbers. So, you know, not only is there different things like Billy said, you have to view, you know, the urban versus rural, but the variety of different perspectives and how people approach things. But one thing that has always been successful in my interactions in my time in the chamber world is always working with like your Iowa Chamber Alliances, Professional Developers of Iowa, ABI, Iowa Business Council, go down the list, IADA, obviously other public partners as well. But you can have some really good conversations to set the stage going into the legislative session about what are some good ways in which we can have good conversations and realistically impact these. Obviously, working with the people that directly work in the childcare and housing sector, obviously very important. But those are things that I think are really important at the state level to have the most positive impact, because we need to be realistic about what that is, and where you get that information is by the people who are doing it every day. It's talking to Debbie and her team that are seeing it on a statewide perspective every day. So those are so important, and that's a very important piece to have. But then you can bring it down to the local level, obviously, too, and it goes back to that collaboration, communications, all those different pieces, and just getting the right people at the table. But one thing, like for example, housing, no one is going to single-handedly bring a group together that's going to fix housing. That needs to be broken, in my opinion, out in the silos. There's a bunch of different pieces that have to be corrected in that, and that's how you have to address it. That's how we're trying to do it in our community, is how can we impact low to moderate income? How can we impact market rate? How can we impact high density, medium density, single family owner occupied, and use some of the array of federal funds that are out there right now to do so.
Great. Candy, I want to ask you, when it comes to business opportunities, what role do you see education institutions playing in that?
You know, for us being located at a community college, we do talk about this all the time, because we play more roles than just 4-year credit, or 2 or 4-year 4-credit degrees. Education to us is a mix of whatever stages people are at in life. So if you're in high school and you're in concurrent enrollment getting college credits, that's one piece of education. If you're planning to transfer, you're getting your AS degree, and that's one component. If you are already completed and in the business world and you need credits, continuing ed credits, we have that. Then we have the economic development arm, that's workforce development, education, industry training education, workforce training education. And then on our side, it's entrepreneurship education and training, entrepreneurial mindset education, which we start as young as 5th grade. So I think education is always at the center of everything that we do. The method might vary and the audience might vary, but it's always at the center. And just like we're doing here now, I mean, I consider this type of panel and forum education, because we're all learning. So it's that continuous learning, regardless of what stage you're at, that is really what keeps that momentum for continuous innovation and acceleration across the state.
Thank you. And Billy, I know you all work with Iowa State a lot. What would you add about the education side of this?
Well, I think if we go back to education in the food and ag industry, you go back to the beginnings, you know, you go back to how can you bring that in locally, whether it's Iowa State being in every county, whether it is Iowa State partnering with DMACC, partnering with our businesses. But more important, I think, as a mom who has a senior or a kid going to be a senior next year, how do we even help in our elementary schools, our K-12 schools? Bringing to awareness opportunities that are right here in their backyard, bringing abilities for them to be able to discern information and to be intelligent conversationalists, you know, so they bring people together with them. I think that's a huge thing we get throughout our whole education system. Iowa State is a huge partner, and I think all of our businesses would say they're better because of partnerships they've had with Iowa State. And Iowa State students will probably say they're better because of those partnerships too. I tend to focus primarily on agriculture and the food and ag industry, but even when we look at what companies like Rockwell Collins are doing with the students at Iowa State, innovation is in every department up there. And University of Iowa, you and I would say the same things. When you go to the university with a problem, you don't necessarily, if it's an ag problem, only get help from the College of Ag and Land Science or ag science, life sciences. You also get help from the engineering school, the business school, the liberal arts school. You have all those resources you can tackle. And that's similar probably with the community college too. If a local business person's having issues or wanting to hire workforce, they can go in and have those intimate conversations to make a difference. So again, I guess my talking point for today goes back, have solid relationships and build conversations, and don't be afraid to raise your hand.
Thank you. Drew, I want to go back to you, some of those public-private partnerships that you have mentioned. What are some lessons that you all have been learning that maybe other communities could apply?
Yeah, well, really one of the most important is to just have regular conversations with those folks. So when you try to pull them together, it's not something like, well, we haven't met in 3 years. It's something where, you know, you're having those conversations regularly. That's something that when I came to the chamber was a need in our community, was to have that. You know, we have a very unique situation here where the Iowa West Foundation, we have the largest gaming apparatus in the state of Iowa. Therefore, we have a ton of money that goes back into the community through the gaming revenue, and the Iowa West Foundation is the QSO that does that donating out into the community. So having the strong relationship with them, their CEO came on a month after I did. The community college CEO came on 6 months after I did. Long story short, lots of new leaders in the community. So we really were the person driving, or the entity driving that collaboration, and those folks getting together to have these shared conversations. So when something like 100 to 300, we'll say $1 million project, like a multimodal bridge and streetcar comes, we're in a position where we can mobilize pretty quickly. And that three-legged stool, the chamber, the city, Iowa West Foundation, and then private fundraisers, when it becomes appropriate, can move right along. And it's not a problem when we have to have the project picked by 24 to use ARPA funds and 26 to have them spent. So that's something that we've really tried to make sure that we push. It's really that deliberate piece, and it goes back. It all is really like what Billy said, is that relationship piece, is just having those consistent relationships. So when you call on people, they'll answer and hopefully come together to do what they need to do.
Great. And I know we're coming up on our time with the panel, so I want to give you each a chance to maybe just talk about a story or idea that you want to be highlighting to further Iowa when it comes to business opportunities. So Tej, we'll start with you.
Sorry, Emily, I got distracted by Dr. Imhotep's question. Could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, so just if there's a story or idea that you want to be highlighting to further Iowa when it comes to business opportunity.
The ideas, the stories I tap back to most are entrepreneurship has roots in the creation of the state before this boundary was Iowa, whether it was Julian Dubuque with mining, or the likes of Vermeer and Pella and all of the other amazing companies around our state in rural areas, mind you, most of them. we have a rich history. This isn't the last 10 years of success or the last 20 years of success. This is the last 150 years of success. So we cannot just look at the short history. We have to look at the long history, and continue reliving our ability to succeed because of the perseverance that exists across the state. That's what I rely on all the time, and I'm always looking for those kinds of stories.
Billi, what would you say?
What you're going to be seeing from us in the next year to 18 months is elevating storytelling on how innovation is driving sustainability within the industry. So we all like all the innovations around us, but sometimes we struggle with connecting the links of the chain all the way down to the consumers. So I think storytelling, that only happens again by connections and relationship building and being able to trust each other with conversations. And so we're looking forward to that and how that impacts our communities around the state.
Drew, what's your takeaway?
It kind of goes back to what on a different scale or different side of things, but storytelling, like Billi talked about, and like we have the people, we have the job opportunities, we have the amenities, we have a low cost of living, we have safety, we have all these things that people want. And the This Is Iowa campaign and some others are doing a really good job of getting that out there. The baseball game that just happened in Dyersville, great opportunity to showcase Iowa. But I think we really, for us locally, an example is, you have to tell your story and unify around a vision and mission because no one else is going to do it. And that was something that we saw in Council Bluffs and has been done a lot better in the last 5 to 10 years. And the last thing I'll just say on that is you can't change the narrative by just doing what's always been done. You have to be willing to break down the walls and just say, no, that's not okay, or that's not how we're going to do things. And when you're in a community like I am right now, where there's all these new leaders that are in key positions that came on within a year of each other, making sure that you're all on the same page so you can have the proper narrative moving forward is so important, but then also empowering and crediting one another where it's due so everyone feels valued in their roles and in their positions in that.
Yeah, Andrew, you mentioned the Field of Dreams game, and the Iowa State Fair started on it last week as well. So very Iowa things all last week. Candy, what's your takeaway?
It's really similar to what the others have said. I think that we do a good job of telling stories. You guys here at the Business Record and have done a great job of telling stories. Clay and Milk, Diana Wright, and Greater Des Moines Partnership, and then all of us. We just need more people telling the whole story, painting the whole picture of the collaborations that are occurring and of the resources that are available, and directing that person that feels left out to a resource that may be the most appropriate for them. I think I saw one of the comments on the wealth gap, and we need everyone to feel welcome and included, whether it's at my center in Des Moines or in Council Bluffs. We want to make sure that we're telling the story of all of the entrepreneurs, whether they bootstrapped their way to where they are, or whether they've gotten millions in venture capital. All those stories are important, from Main Street to John Deere.
Great. Well, I want to thank each of you for being on the panel. There's much more that we could talk about when it comes to business opportunities, but just thank you all for sharing some great food for thought, and we'll be talking about that in our next breakout. So we'll conduct this breakout.